already too late, said Oberika sadly. Our own men and our sons have joined the ranks of the stranger. They have joined his religion, and they help to uphold his government. If we should try to drive out the white men in Umuofia, we should find it easy. There are only 2 of them. But what of our own people who are following their way and have been given power? They would go to Umuru and bring the soldiers, and we would be like Abame. He paused for a long time and then said, I told you on my last visit to Mbanta how they hanged Aneto. What has happened to that piece of land in dispute? Asked Okonkwo. The white man's court has decided that it should belong to Nama's family, who had given much money to the white man's messengers and interpreter. Does the white man understand our custom about land? How can he, when he does not even speak our tongue? But he says that our customs are bad, and our own brothers who have taken up his religion also say that our customs are bad. How do you think we can fight when our own brothers have turned against us? The white man is very clever. He came peaceably and quietly with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart.
For 3 moons the sun had been gathering strength, till it seemed to breathe a breath of fire on the earth. All the grass had long been scorched brown, and the sands felt like live coals to the feet. Evergreen trees wore a dusty coat of brown. The birds were silenced in the forests, and the world lay panting under the live, vibrating heat. And then came the clap of thunder. It was an angry, metallic, and thirsty clap, unlike the deep and liquid rumbling of the rainy season. A mighty wind arose and filled the air with dust. Palm trees swayed as the wind combed their leaves into flying crests like strange and fantastic coiffure. When the rain finally came, it was in large solid drops of frozen water, which the people called the nuts of the water of heaven. They were hard and painful on the body as they fell, yet young people ran about happily, picking up the cold nuts and throwing them into their mouths to melt. The earth quickly came to life, and the birds in the forests fluttered around and chirped merrily. A vague scent of life and green vegetation was diffused in the air. As the rain began to fall more soberly and in smaller liquid drops, children sought for shelter, and all were happy, refreshed, and thankful. Okonkwo and his family worked very hard to plant a new farm, but it was like beginning life anew, without the vigor and enthusiasm of youth, like learning to become left-handed in old age. Work no longer had for him the pleasure it used to have, and when there was no work to do, he sat in a silent half-sleep. His life had been ruled by a great passion, to become one of the lords of the clan. That had been his life spring, and he had all but achieved it. Then, everything had been broken. He had been cast out of his clan, like a fish onto a dry, sandy beach, panting. Clearly, his personal god, or chi, was not made for great things. A man could not rise beyond the destiny of his chi. The saying of the elders was not true, that if a man said yea, his chi also affirmed. Here was a man whose chi said nay, despite his own affirmation. The old man, Uchendu, saw clearly that Okonkwo had yielded to despair, and he was greatly troubled. He would speak to him after the Isa Ifi ceremony. The youngest of Uchendu's 5 sons, Amikwu, was marrying a new wife. price had been paid, and all but the last ceremony had been performed. Amikwu and his people had taken palm wine to the bride's kinsmen about 2 moons before Okonkwo's arrival in Mbanta. And so it was time for the final ceremony of confession. The daughters of the family were all there, some of them having come a long way from their homes in distant villages. Uchendu's eldest daughter had come from Obodo, nearly half a day's journey away. The daughters of Uchendu's brothers were also there. It was a full gathering of Umuofia, in the same way as they would meet if a death occurred in the family. There were 22 of them. They sat in a big circle on the ground, and the bride sat in the center, with a hen in her right hand. Uchendu sat by her, holding the ancestral staff of the family. All the other men stood outside the circle, watching. Their wives watched also. It was evening, and the sun was setting. Uchendu's eldest daughter, Njide, asked the questions. Remember that if you do not answer truthfully, you will suffer or even die at childbirth, she began. How many men have lain with you since my brother first expressed the desire to marry you? None, she answered simply. Answer truthfully, urged the other women. None? Asked Njide. None, she answered. Swear on this staff of my father's, said Uchendu. I swear, said the bride. Uchendu took the hen from her, slit its throat with a sharp knife, and allowed some of the blood to fall in his ancestral staff. From that day, Amikwu took the young bride to his hut, and she became his wife. The daughters of the family did not return to their homes immediately, but spent 2 or 3 days with their kinsmen. On the second day, Uchendu called together his sons and daughters and his nephew, Okonkwo. The men brought their goatskin mats, with which they sat on the floor, and the women sat on a sisal mat spread on a raised bank of earth. Uchendu pulled gently at his gray beard and gnashed his teeth. Then he began to speak, quietly and deliberately, picking his words with great care. It is Okonkwo that I primarily wish to speak to, he began. But I want all of you to note what I am going to say. I am an old man, and you are all children. I know more about the world than any of you. If there is anyone among you who thinks he knows more, let him speak up. He paused, but no one spoke. Why is Okonkwo with us today? This is not his clan. We are only his mother's kinsmen. He does not belong here. He is an exile, condemned for 7 years to live in a strange land. And so he is bowed with grief. But there is just one question I would like to ask him. Can you tell me, Okonkwo, why it is that one of the commonest names we give our children is Unoka, or Mother is Supreme? We all know that a man is the head of the family, and his wives do his bidding. A child belongs to its father and his family, and not to its mother and her family. A man belongs to his fatherland, and not to his motherland. And yet we say, Unoka, Mother is Supreme. Why is that? There was a silence. I want Okonkwo to answer me, said Uchendu. I do not know the answer, Okonkwo replied. You do not know the answer? So you see that you are a child. You have many wives and many children, more children than I have. You are a great man in your clan, but you are still a child, my child. Listen to me and I shall tell you. But there is one more question I shall ask you. Why is it that when a woman dies, she is taken home to be buried with her own kinsmen? She is not buried with her husband's kinsmen. Why is that? Your mother was brought home to me and buried with my people. Why was that? Okonkwo shook his head. He does not know that either, said Uchendu. And yet he is full of sorrow because he has to come live in his motherland for a few years. He laughed a mirthless laugh and turned to his sons and daughters. What about you? Can you answer my question? They all shook their heads. Then listen to me, he said, and cleared his throat. It's true that a child belongs to its father, but when a father beats his child, it seeks sympathy in its mother's hut. A man belongs to his fatherland when things are good and life is sweet. But when there is sorrow and bitterness, he finds refuge in his motherland. Your mother is there to protect you. She is buried there. And that is why we say that mother is supreme. Is it right that you, Okonkwo, should bring to your mother a heavy face and refuse to be comforted? Be careful, or you may displease the dead. Your duty is to comfort your wives and children and take them back to your fatherland after 7 years. But if you allow sorrow to weigh you down and kill you, they will all die in exile. He paused for a long while. These are now your kinsmen. He waved at his sons and daughters. You think you are the greatest sufferer in the world? Do you know that men are sometimes banished for life? Do you know that men sometimes lose all their yams and even their children? I had 6 wives once. I have none now, except that young girl who knows not her right from her left. Do you know how many children I have buried? Children I begot in my youth and strength. 22. I did not hang myself, and I am still alive. If you think you are the greatest sufferer in the world, ask my daughter, Akweni, how many twins she has borne and thrown away. Have you not heard the song they sing when a woman dies? For whom is it well? For whom is it well? There is no one for whom it is well. I have no more to say to you. Chapter 15. It was in the 2nd year of Okonkwo's exile that his friend, Obiaraka, came to visit him. He brought with him 2 young men, each of them carrying a heavy bag on his head. Okonkwo helped them put down their loads. It was clear that the bags were full of cowries. Okonkwo was very happy to receive his friend. His wives and children were very happy too, and so were his cousins and their wives, when he sent for them and told them who his guest was. You must take him to salute our father, said one of the cousins. Yes, replied Okonkwo, we are going directly. But before they went, he whispered something to his first wife. She nodded, and soon the children were chasing one of their cocks. Uchendu had been told by one of his grandchildren that 3 strangers had come to Okonkwo's house. He was therefore waiting to receive them. He held out his hands to them when they came into his obi, and after they had shaken hands, he asked Okonkwo who they were. This is Obiaraka, my great friend. I have already spoken to you about him. Yes, said the old man, turning to Obierica. My son has told me about you, and I am happy you have come to see us. I knew your father, Nwoye. He was a great man. He had many friends here, and came to see them quite often. Those were good days, when a man had friends in distant clans. Your generation does not know that. You stay at home, afraid of your next-door neighbor. Even a man's motherland is strange to him nowadays. He looked at Okonkwo. I am an old man, and I like to talk. That is all I am good for now. He got up painfully, went into an inner room, and came back with a kola nut. Who are the young men with you? He asked as he sat down again on his goat skin. Okonkwo told him. Ah, he said, welcome, my sons. He presented the kola nut to them, and when they had seen it and thanked him, he broke it, and they ate. Go into that room, he said to Okonkwo, pointing with his finger. You will find a pot of wine there. Okonkwo brought the wine, and they began to drink. It was a day old, and very strong. Yes, said Uchendu after a long silence. People traveled more in those days. There is not a single clan in these parts that I do not know very well. Aninta, Umuazu, Ikeocha, Ilumelu, Abame. I know them all. Have you heard, asked Obierica, that Abame is no more? How is that? Asked Uchendu and Okonkwo together. Abame has been wiped out, said Obierica. It is a strange and terrible story. If I had not seen the few survivors with my own eyes and heard their story with my own ears, I would not have believed. Was it not on an Eke day that they fled into Umuofia? He asked his two companions, and they nodded their heads. 3 moons ago, said Obierica, on an Eke market day, a little band of fugitives came into our town. Most of them were sons of our land, whose mothers had been buried with us. But there were some, too, who came because they had friends in our town, and others who could think of nowhere else open to escape. And so they fled into Umuofia with a woeful story. He drank his palm wine, and Okonkwo filled his horn again. He continued. During the last planting season, a white man had appeared in their clan. An albino, suggested Okonkwo. He was not an albino. He was quite different. He sipped his wine. And he was riding an iron horse. The first people who saw him ran away, but he stood, beckoning to them. In the end, the fearless ones went near and even touched him. The elders consulted their oracle, and it told them that the strange man would break their clan and spread destruction among them. Obierica again drank a little of his wine. And so they killed the white man and tied his iron horse to their sacred tree, because it looked as if it would run away to call the man's friends. I forgot to tell you another thing, which the oracle said. It said that other white men were on their way. They were locusts, it said, and that first man was their harbinger, sent to explore the terrain, and so they killed him. What did the white man say before they killed him? Asked Uchendu. He said nothing, answered one of Obierica's companions. He said something, only they did not understand him, said Obierica. He seemed to speak through his nose. One of the men told me, said Obiaraka's other companion, that he repeated over and over again a word that resembled Mbino. Perhaps he'd been going to Mbino and had lost his way. Anyway, resumed Obiaraka, they killed him and tied up his iron horse. This was before the planting season began. For a long time nothing happened. The rains had come and yams had been sown. The iron horse was still tied to the sacred silk cotton tree. And then one morning, 3 white men, led by a band of ordinary men like us, came to the clan. They saw the iron horse and went away again. Most of the men and women of Abame had gone to their farms. Only a few of them saw these white men and their followers. For many market weeks, nothing else happened. They have a big market in Abame on every other Afo day, and, as you know, the whole clan gathers there. That was the day it happened. The 3 white men and a very large number of other men surrounded the market. They must have used a powerful medicine to make themselves invisible until the market was full, and they began to shoot. Everybody was killed, except the old and the sick who were at home, and a handful of men and women whose chi were wide awake and brought them out of that market. He paused. Their clan is now completely empty. Even the sacred fish in their mysterious lake have fled, and the lake has turned the color of blood. A great evil has come upon their land, as the oracle had warned. There was a long silence. Uchendu ground his teeth together audibly. Then he burst out. Never kill a man who says nothing. Those men of Abame were fools. What do they know about the man? He ground his teeth again and told a story to illustrate his point. Mother Kite once sent her daughter to bring food. She went and brought back a duckling. You have done very well, said Mother Kite to her daughter. But tell me, what did the mother of this duckling say when you swooped and carried its child away? It said nothing, replied the young kite. It just walked away. You must return the duckling, said Mother Kite. There is something ominous behind the silence. And so Daughter Kite returned the duckling and took a chick instead. What did the mother of this chick do? Asked the old kite. It cried and raved and cursed me, said the young kite. Then we can eat the chick, said her mother. There is nothing to fear from someone who shouts. Those men of Abame were fools. They were fools, said Okonkwo after a pause. They had been warned that danger was ahead. They should have armed themselves with their guns and their machetes, even when they went to market. They have paid for their foolishness, said Obiaraka. But I am greatly afraid. We have heard stories about white men who made the powerful guns and the strong drinks and took slaves away across the seas, but no one thought the stories were true. There is no story that is not true, said Uchendu. The world has no end, and what is good among one people is an abomination with others. We have albinos among us. Do you not think that they came to our clan by mistake, that they have strayed from their way to a land where everybody is like them? Okonkwo's first wife soon finished her cooking and set before their guests a big meal of pounded yams and bitter leaf soup. Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, brought in a pot of sweet wine tapped from the raffia palm. You are a big man now, Obiaraka said to Nwoye. Your friend, Anene, asked me to greet you. Is he well? Asked Nwoye. We are all well, said Obiaraka. Ezinma brought them a bowl of water with which to wash their hands. After that, they began to eat and to drink the wine. When did you set out from home? Asked Okonkwo. We had meant to set out from my house before cockcrow, said Obiaraka. But Nwoye did not appear until it was quite light. Never make an early morning appointment with a man who has just married a new wife. They all laughed. Has Nwoye married a wife? Asked Okonkwo. He has married Okadigbo's second daughter, said Obiaraka. That is very good, said Okonkwo. I do not blame you for not hearing the cock crow. When they had eaten, Obiaraka pointed at the two heavy bags. That is the money from your yams, he said. I sold the big ones as soon as you left. Later on, I sold some of the seed yams and gave out others to sharecroppers. I shall do that every year until you return. But I thought you would need the money now, and so I brought it. Who knows what may happen tomorrow? Perhaps green men will come to our clan and shoot us. God will not permit it, said Okonkwo. I do not know how to thank you. I can tell you, said Obiaraka. Kill one of your sons for me. That will not be enough, said Okonkwo. Then kill yourself, said Obiaraka. Forgive me, said Okonkwo, smiling. I shall not talk about thanking you any more. Chapter 16. When, nearly 2 years later, Obiaraka paid another visit to his friend in exile, the circumstances were less happy. The missionaries had come to Umuofia. They had built their church there, won a handful of converts, and were already sending evangelists to the surrounding towns and villages. That was a source of great sorrow to the leaders of the clan, but many of them believed that the strange faith and the white man's God would not last. None of his converts was a man whose word was heeded in the assembly of the people. None of them was a man of title. They were mostly the kind of people that were called efulefu, worthless, empty men. The imagery of an efulefu in the language of the clan was a man who sold his machete and wore the sheath to battle. Chielo, the priestess of Agbala, called the converts the excrement of the clan, and the new faith was a mad dog that had come to eat it up. What moved Obiaraka to visit Okonkwo was the sudden appearance of the latter's son, Nwoye, among the missionaries in Umuofia. What are you doing here? Obiaraka had asked when, after many difficulties, the missionaries had allowed him to speak to the boy. I am one of them, replied Nwoye. How is your father? Obiaraka asked, not knowing what else to say. I don't know. He is not my father, said Nwoye, unhappily. And so, Obiaraka went to Mbanta to see his friend. And he found that Okonkwo did not wish to speak about Nwoye. It was only from Nwoye's mother that he heard scraps of the story. The arrival of the missionaries had caused a considerable stir in the village of Mbanta. There were 6 of them, and one was a white man. Every man and woman came out to see the white man. Stories about these strange men had grown since one of them had been killed in Abame, and his iron horse tied to the sacred silk cotton tree. And so everybody came to see the white man. It was the time of year when everybody was at home. The harvest was over. When they had all gathered, The white man began to speak to them. He spoke through an interpreter, who was an Igbo man, though his dialect was different and harsh to the ears of Mbanta. Many people laughed at his dialect and the way he used words strangely. Instead of saying, myself, he always said, my buttocks. But he was a man of commanding presence, and the clansmen listened to him. He said he was one of them, as they could see from his color and his language. The other 4 black men were also their brothers, although one of them did not speak Igbo. The white man was also their brother, because they were all sons of God. And he told them about this new God, the creator of all the world and all the men and women. He told them that they worshipped false gods, gods of wood and stone. A deep murmur went through the crowd when he said this. He told them that the true God lived on high, and that all men, when they died, went before him for judgment. Evil men and all the heathen who in their blindness bowed to wood and stone were thrown into a fire that burned like palm oil. But good men, who worshipped the true God, lived forever in his happy kingdom. We have been sent by this great God to ask you to leave your wicked ways and false gods and turn to him, so that you may be saved when you die, he said. Your buttocks understand our language, said someone lightheartedly, and the crowd laughed. What did he say? The white man asked his interpreter. But before he could answer, another man asked a question. Where is the white man's horse? He asked. The Igbo evangelists consulted among themselves and decided that the man probably meant bicycle. They told the white man, and he smiled benevolently. Tell them, he said, that I shall bring many iron horses when we have settled down among them. Some of them will even ride the iron horse themselves. This was interpreted to them, but very few of them heard. They were talking excitedly among themselves, because the white man had said he was going to live among them. They had not thought about that. At this point, an old man said he had a question. Which is this God of yours? The goddess of the earth? The god of the sky? Amadiora? Thunderbolt? Or what? The white man, and he immediately gave his answer. All the gods you have named are not gods at all. They are gods of deceit, who tell you to kill your fellows and destroy innocent children. There is only one, and he has the earth, the sky, you and us. If we leave our gods, God, asked another man, who will protect us from the anger of our neglected gods and ancestors? Your gods are not alive and cannot do you any harm, replied the white man. They are pieces of wood and stone. When this was interpreted to the men of Mbanta, they broke into derisive laughter. These men must be mad, they said to themselves. How else could they say that Ani and Amadiora were harmless? And Idemili and Ogugu too? And some of them began to go away. Then the missionaries burst into song. It was one of those gay and rollicking tunes of evangelism which had the power of plucking at silent and dusty chords in the heart of an Igbo man. The interpreter explained each verse to the audience, some of whom now stood enthralled. It was a story of brothers who lived in darkness and in fear, ignorant of the love of God. It told of one sheep out on the hills, away from the gates of God and from the tender shepherd's care. After the singing, the interpreter spoke about the Son of God, whose name was Jesu Christi. Okonkwo, who only stayed in the hope that it might come to chasing the men out of the village or whipping them, now said, "You told us with your own mouth that there was only one God. Now you talk about his son? He must have a wife then?" The crowd agreed. "I did not say he had a wife," said the interpreter, somewhat lamely. "Your buttock said he had a son," said the joker. "So he must have a wife, and all of them must have buttocks." The missionary ignored him and went on to talk about the Holy Trinity. At the end of it, Okonkwo was fully convinced that the man was mad. He shrugged his shoulders and went away to tap his afternoon palm wine. But there was a young lad who had been captivated. His name was Nwoye, Okonkwo's first son. It was not the mad logic of the Trinity that captivated him. He did not understand it. It was the poetry of the new religion, something felt in the marrow. The hymn about brothers who sat in darkness and in fear seemed to answer a vague and persistent question that haunted his young soul. The question of the twins crying in the bush, and the question of Ikemefuna, who was killed. He felt a relief within as the hymn poured into his parched soul. The words of the hymn were like the drops of frozen rain melting on the dry palate of the panting earth. Nwoye's callow mind was greatly puzzled. Chapter 17. The missionaries spent their first 4 or 5 nights in the marketplace and went into the village in the morning to preach the gospel. They asked who the king of the village was, but the villagers told them that there was no king. "We have men of high title, and the chief priests, and the elders," they said. It was not very easy getting the men of high title and the elders together after the excitement of the first day. But the missionaries persevered, and in the end, they were received by the rulers of Umbanta. They asked for a plot of land to build their church. Every clan and village had its evil forest. In it were buried all those who died of the really evil diseases, like leprosy and smallpox. It was also the dumping ground for the potent fetishes of great medicine men when they died. An evil forest was, therefore, alive with sinister forces and powers of darkness. It was such a forest that the rulers of Umbanta gave to the missionaries. They did not really want them in their clan, and so they made them that offer which nobody in his right senses would accept. They want a piece of land to build their shrine, said Uchendu to his peers when they consulted among themselves. "We shall give them a piece of land." He paused, and there was a murmur of surprise and disagreement. "Let us give them a portion of the evil forest. They boast about victory over death. Let us give them a real battlefield in which to show their victory." They laughed and agreed, and sent for the missionaries, whom they had asked to leave them for a while, so that they might whisper together. They offered them as much of the evil forest as they cared to take, and to their greatest amazement, the missionaries thanked them and burst into song. "They do not understand," said some of the elders, "but they will understand when they go to their plot of land tomorrow morning." And they dispersed. The next morning, the crazy men actually began to clear a part of the forest and to build their house. The inhabitants of Umbanta expected them all to be dead within 4 days. The first day passed, and the second, and third, and fourth, and none of them died. Everyone was puzzled. And then it became known that the white man's fetish had unbelievable power. It was said that he wore glasses on his eyes so that he could see and talk to evil spirits. Not long after, he won his first 3 converts. Although Nwoye had been attracted to the new faith from the very first day, he kept it secret. He dared not go too near the missionaries for fear of his father. But whenever they came to preach in the open marketplace or the village playground, Nwoye was there, and he was already beginning to know some of the simple stories they told. "We have now built a church," said Mr. Kiaga, the interpreter, who was now in charge of the infant congregation. The white man had gone back to Umuofia, where he built his headquarters, and from where he paid regular visits to Mr. Kiaga's congregation at Umbanta. "We have now built a church," said Mr. Kiaga, "and we want you all to come in every 7th day to worship the true God." On the following Sunday, Nwoye passed and repassed the little red earth and thatch building without summoning enough courage to enter. He heard the voice of singing, and although it came from a handful of men, it was loud and confident. Their church stood on a circular clearing that looked like the open mouth of the evil forest. Was it waiting to snap its teeth together? After passing and repassing by the church, Nwoye returned home. It was well known among the people of Mbanta that their gods and ancestors were sometimes long-suffering and would deliberately allow a man to go on defying them. But even in such cases, they set their limit at 7 market weeks, or 28 days. Beyond that limit, no man was suffered to go. And so excitement mounted in the village as the 7th week approached, since the impudent missionaries built their church in the evil forest. The villagers were so certain about the doom that awaited these men that 1 or 2 converts thought it wise to suspend their allegiance to the new faith. At last, the day came by which all the missionaries should have died, but they were still alive, building a new red earth and thatch house for their teacher, Mr. Kiaga. That week, they won a handful more converts, and for the first time, they had a woman. Her name was Neka, the wife of Amadi, who was a prosperous farmer. She was very heavy with child. Neka had had 4 previous pregnancies and childbirths, but each time she had borne twins, and they had been immediately thrown away. Her husband and his family were already becoming highly critical of such a woman, and were not unduly perturbed when they found she had fled to join the Christians. It was a good riddance. One morning, Okonkwo's cousin, Amikwu, was passing by the church on his way from the neighboring village when he saw Nwoye. He was greatly surprised, and when he got home, he went straight to Okonkwo's hut and told him what he had seen. The women began to talk excitedly, but Okonkwo was moved. It was late afternoon before Nwoye returned and saluted his father, but he did not answer. Nwoye turned round to walk into the inner compound when his father, suddenly overcome with fury, sprang to his feet and gripped him by the neck. "Where have you been?" he stammered. Nwoye struggled to free himself from the choking grip. "Answer me," roared Okonkwo, "before I kill you." He seized a heavy stick that lay on the dwarf wall and hit him 2 or 3 savage blows. "Answer me," he roared again. Nwoye stood looking at him and did not say a word. The women were screaming outside, afraid to go in. "Leave that boy at once," said a voice in the outer compound. It was Okonkwo's uncle, Uchendu. "Are you mad?" Okonkwo did not answer, but he left hold of Nwoye, who walked away and never returned. He went back to the church and told Mr. Kiaga that he had decided to go to Umuofia, where the white missionary had set up a school to teach young Christians to read and write. Mr. Kiaga's joy was very great. "Blessed is he who forsakes his father and his mother for my sake," he intoned. "Those that hear my words are my father and my mother." Nwoye did not fully understand, but he was happy to leave his father. He would return later to his mother and his brothers and sisters and convert them to the new faith. As Okonkwo sat in his hut that night, gazing into a log fire, he thought over the matter. A sudden fury rose within him, and he felt a strong desire to take up his machete, go to the church, and wipe out the entire vile and miscreant gang. But on further thought, he told himself that Nwoye was not worth fighting for. Why, he cried in his heart, should he, Okonkwo, of all people, be cursed with such a son? He saw clearly in it the finger of his personal god, or chi. For how else could he explain his great misfortune and exile, and now his despicable son's behavior? Now that he had time to think of it, his son's crime stood out in its stark enormity. To abandon the gods of one's father and go about with a lot of effeminate men, clucking like old hens, was the very depth of abomination. Suppose when he died, all his male children decided to follow Nwoye's steps and abandon their ancestors. Okonkwo felt a cold shudder run through him at the terrible prospects, like the prospect of annihilation. He saw himself and his fathers crowding round their ancestral shrine, waiting in vain for worship and sacrifice, and finding nothing but ashes of bygone days, and his children the while praying to the white man's God. If such a thing were ever to happen, he, Okonkwo, would wipe them off the face of the earth. Okonkwo was popularly called the Roaring Flame. As he looked into the log fire, he recalled the name. He was a flaming fire. How then could he have begotten a son like Nwoye, degenerate and effeminate? Perhaps he was not his son. No, he could not be. His wife had played him false. He would teach her. But Nwoye resembled his grandfather, Unoka, who was Okonkwo's father. He pushed the thought out of his mind. He, Okonkwo, was called a flaming fire. How could he have begotten a woman for a son? At Nwoye's age, Okonkwo had already become famous throughout Umuofia for his wrestling and his fearlessness. He sighed heavily, and as if in sympathy, the smoldering log also sighed. And immediately, Okonkwo's eyes were opened, and he saw the whole matter clearly. Living fire begets cold, impotent ash. He sighed again, deeply. Chapter 18. The young church in Mbanta had a few crises early in its life. At first, the clan had assumed that it would not survive, but it had gone on living and gradually became stronger. The clan was worried, but not overmuch. If a gang of Efelefu decided to live in the evil forest, it was their own affair. When one came to think of it, the evil forest was a fit home for such undesirable people. It was true they were rescuing twins from the bush, but they never brought them into the village. As far as the villagers were concerned, the twins still remained where they had been thrown away. Surely the earth goddess would not visit the sins of the missionaries on the innocent villagers. But on one occasion, the missionaries had tried to overstep the bounds. 3 converts had gone into the village and boasted openly that all the gods were dead and impotent, and that they were prepared to defy them by burning all their shrines. "Go and burn your mother's genitals," said one of the priests. The men were seized and beaten until they streamed with blood. After that, nothing happened for a long time between the church and the clan. But stories were already gaining ground that the white man had not only brought a religion, but also a government. It was said that they had built a place of judgment in Umuofia to protect the followers of their religion. It was even said that they had hanged one man who killed a missionary. Although such stories were now often told, they looked like fairy tales in Umbanda, and did not as yet affect the relationship between the new church and the clan. There was no question of killing a missionary here, for Mr. Kiaga, despite his madness, was quite harmless. As for his converts, no one could kill them without having to flee from the clan, for in spite of their worthlessness, they still belonged to the clan. And so nobody gave serious thought to the stories about the white man's government or the consequences of killing the Christians. If they became more troublesome than they already were, they would simply be driven out of the clan. And the little church was at that moment too deeply absorbed in its own troubles to annoy the clan. It all began over the question of admitting outcasts. These outcasts, or Osu, seeing new religion welcomed twins and such abominations, thought that it was possible that they would also be received. And so one Sunday, 2 of them went into the church. There was an immediate stir. But so great was the work the new religion had done among the converts that they did not immediately leave the church when the outcasts came in. Those who found themselves nearest to them merely moved to another seat. It was a miracle. But it only lasted till the end of the service. The whole church raised a protest and was about to drive these people out when Mr. Kiaga stopped them and began to explain. "Before God," he said, "there is no slave or free. We are all children of God, and we must receive these, our brothers." "You do not understand," said one of the converts. "What will the heathen say of us when they hear that we receive Osu in our midst? They will laugh." "Let them laugh," said Mr. Kiaga. "God will laugh at them on the judgment day. Why do the nations rage and the peoples imagine a vain thing? He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision." "You do not understand," the convert maintained. "You are our teacher and you can teach us the things of the new faith, but this is a matter which we know." And he told him what an Osu was. He was a person dedicated to a god, a thing set apart, a taboo forever, and his children after him. He could neither marry nor be married by the freeborn. He was in fact an outcast, living in a special area of the village, close to the great shrine. Wherever he went, he carried with him the mark of his forbidden caste, long, tangled, and dirty hair. A razor was taboo to him. An Osu could not attend an assembly of the freeborn, and they in turn could not shelter under his roof. He could not take any of the 4 titles of the clan, and when he died, he was buried by his kind in the evil forest. How could such a man be a follower of Christ? He needs Christ more than you and I, said Mr. Kiaga. Then I shall go back to the clan, said the convert, and he went. Mr. Kiaga stood firm, and it was his firmness that saved the young church. The wavering converts drew inspiration and confidence from his unshakable faith. He ordered the outcasts to shave off their long tangled hair. At first, they were afraid they might die. Unless you shave off the mark of your heathen belief, I will not admit you into the church, said Mr. Kiaga. You fear that you will die. Why should that be? How are you different from other men who shave their hair? The same God created you and them, but they have cast you out like lepers. It is against the will of God, who has promised everlasting life to all who believe in his holy name. The heathen say you will die if you do this or that, and you are afraid. They also said I would die if I built my church on this ground. Am I dead? They said I would die if I took care of twins. I am still alive. The heathen speak nothing but falsehood. Only the word of our God is true. The 2 outcasts shaved off their hair, and soon they were the strongest adherents of the new faith. And what was more, nearly all of the Osu in Mbanta followed their example. It was in fact one of them who in his zeal brought the church into serious conflict with the clan a year later by killing the sacred python, the emanation of the god of water. The royal python was the most revered animal in Mbanta and all the surrounding clans. It was addressed as Our Father, and was allowed to go wherever it chose, even into people's beds. It ate rats in the house, and sometimes swallowed hens' eggs. If a clansman killed a royal python accidentally, he made sacrifices of atonement and performed an expensive burial ceremony, such as was done for a great man. No punishment was prescribed for a man who killed the python knowingly. Nobody thought that such a thing could ever happen. Perhaps it never did happen. That was the way the clan at first looked at it. No one had actually seen the man do it. The story had arisen among the Christians themselves. But all the same, the rulers and elders of Mbanta assembled to decide on their action. Many of them spoke at great length and in fury. The spirit of wars was upon them. Okonkwo, who had begun to play a part in the affairs of his motherland, said that until the abominable gang was chased out of the village with whips, there would be no peace. But there were many others who saw the situation differently, and it was their counsel that prevailed in the end. It is not our custom to fight for our gods, said one of them. Let us not presume to do so now. If a man kills the sacred python in the secrecy of his hut, the matter lies between him and the god. We did not see it. If we put ourselves between the god and his victim, we may receive blows intended for the offender. When a man blasphemes, what do we do? Do we go and stop his mouth? No. We put our fingers into our ears to stop us hearing. That is a wise action. Let us not reason like cowards, said Okonkwo. If a man comes into my hut and defecates on the floor, what do I do? Do I shut my eyes? No. I take a stick and break his head. That is what a man does. These people are daily pouring filth over us, and Okeke says we should pretend not to see. Okonkwo made a sound full of disgust. This was a womanly clan, he thought. Such a thing could never happen in his fatherland, Umuofia. Okonkwo has spoken the truth, said another man. We should do something, but let us ostracize these men. We would then not be held accountable for their abominations. Everybody in the assembly spoke, and in the end, it was decided to ostracize the Christians. Okonkwo ground his teeth in disgust. That night, a bellman went through the length and breadth of Mbanta, proclaiming that the adherents of the new faith were thenceforth excluded from the life and privileges of the clan. The Christians had grown in number and were now a small community of men, women, and children, self-assured and confident. Mr. Brown, the white missionary, paid regular visits to them. When I think that it is only 18 months since the seed was first sown among you, he said, I marvel at what the Lord hath wrought. It was Wednesday in Holy Week, and Mr. Kiaga had asked the women to bring red earth and white chalk and water to scrub the church for Easter. And the women had formed themselves into 3 groups for this purpose. They set out early that morning, some of them with their water pots to the stream, another group with hoes and baskets to the village red earth pit, and the others to the chalk quarry. Mr. Kiaga was praying in the church when he heard the women talking excitedly. He rounded off his prayer and went to see what it was all about. The women had come to the church with empty water pots. They said that some young men had chased them away from the stream with whips. Soon after, the women who had gone for red earth returned with empty baskets. Some of them had been heavily whipped. The chalk women also returned to tell a similar story. What does it all mean? Asked Mr. Kiaga, who was greatly perplexed. The village has outlawed us, said one of the women. The bellman announced it last night, but it is not our custom to debar anyone from the stream or the quarry. Another woman said, They want to ruin us. They will not allow us into the markets. They have said so. Mr. Kiaga was going to send into the village for his men converts when he saw them coming on their own. Of course, they had all heard the bellman, but they had never in all their lives heard of women being debarred from the stream. Come along, they said to the women. We will go with you to meet these cowards. Some of them had big sticks, and some even machetes. But Mr. Kiaga restrained them. He wanted first to know why they had been outlawed. They say that Okoli killed the sacred python, said one man. It is false, said another. Okoli told me himself that it was false. Okoli was not there to answer. He had fallen ill on the previous night. Before the day was over, he was dead. His death showed that the gods were still able to fight their own battles. The clan saw no reason then for molesting the Christians. Chapter 19. The last big rains of the year were falling. It was the time for treading red earth with which to build walls. It was not done earlier. because the rains were too heavy and would have washed away the heap of trodden earth. And it could not be done later, because harvesting would soon set in, and after that, the dry season. It was going to be Okonkwo's last harvest in Mbanta. The 7 wasted and weary years were at last dragging to a close. Although he had prospered in his motherland, Okonkwo knew that he would have prospered even more in Umuofia, in the land of his fathers, where men were bold and warlike. In these 7 years, he would have climbed to the utmost heights, and so he regretted every day of his exile. His mother's kinsmen had been very kind to him, and he was grateful, but that did not alter the facts. He had called the first child born to him in exile, Unoka, Mother is Supreme, out of politeness to his mother's kinsmen. But 2 years later, when a son was born, he called him Umuofia, begotten in the wilderness. As soon as he entered his last year in exile, Okonkwo sent money to Obierika to build him 2 huts in his old compound, where he and his family would live until he built more huts and the outside wall of his compound. He could not ask another man to build his own obi for him, nor the walls of his compound. Those things a man built for himself, or inherited from his father. As the last heavy rains of the year began to fall, Obierika sent word that the 2 huts had been built, and Okonkwo began to prepare for his return after the rains. He would have liked to return earlier and build his compound that year before the rains stopped, but in doing so, he would have taken something from the full penalty of 7 years, and that could not be. So he waited impatiently for the dry season to come. It came slowly. The rain became lighter and lighter until it fell in slanting showers. Sometimes the sun shone through the rain, and a light breeze blew. It was a gay and airy kind of rain. The rainbow began to appear, and sometimes 2 rainbows, like a mother and her daughter, the one young and beautiful, and the other an old and faint shadow. The rainbow was called the python of the sky. Okonkwo called his 3 wives and told them to get things together for a great feast. "I must thank my mother's kinsmen before I go," he said. Ikemefuna still had some cassava left on her farm from the previous year. Neither of the other wives had. It was not that they had been lazy, but that they had many children to feed. It was therefore understood that Ikemefuna would provide cassava for the feast. Nwoye's mother and Okonkwo would provide the other things like smoked fish, palm oil, and pepper for the soup. Okonkwo would take care of meat and yams. Ikemefuna rose early on the following morning and went to her farm with her daughter, Izima, and Okonkwo's daughter, Obiageli, to harvest cassava tubers. Each of them carried a long cane basket, a machete for cutting down the soft cassava stem, and a little hoe for digging out the tuber. Fortunately, a light rain had fallen during the night, and the soil would not be very hard. "It will not take us long to harvest as much as we like," said Ikemefuna. "But the leaves will be wet," said Izima. Her basket was balanced on her head, and her arms folded across her breasts. She felt cold. "I dislike cold water dropping on my back. We should have waited for the sun to rise and dry the leaves." Obiageli called her Salt, because she said that she disliked water. "Are you afraid you may dissolve?" The harvesting was easy, as Ikemefuna had said. Ezima shook every tree violently with a long stick before she bent down to cut the stem and dig out the tuber. Sometimes it was not necessary to dig. They just pulled the stump, and earth rose, roots snapped below, and the tuber was pulled out. When they had harvested a sizable heap, they carried it down in 2 trips to the stream, where every woman had a shallow well for fermenting her cassava. "It should be ready in 4 days, or even 3, said Obiageli. "They are young tubers." "They are not all that young," said Ekwefi. "I planted the farm nearly 2 years ago. It is a poor soil, and that is why the tubers are so small." Okonkwo never did things by halves. When his wife Ekwefi protested that 2 goats were sufficient for the feast, he told her that it was not her affair. "I am calling a feast because I have the wherewithal. I cannot live on the bank of a river and wash my hands with spittle. My mother's people have been good to me, and I must show my gratitude." And so 3 goats were slaughtered, and a number of fowls. It was like a wedding feast. There was fufu and yam pottage, egusi soup, and bitter leaf soup, and pots of palm wine. All the Umuna were invited to the feast. All the descendants of Okolo, who had lived about 200 years before. The oldest member of this extensive family was Okonkwo's uncle, Uchendu. The kola nut was given him to break, and he prayed to the ancestors. He asked them for health and children. "We do not ask for wealth, because he that has health and children will also have wealth. We do not pray to have more money, but to have more kinsmen. We are better than animals, because we have kinsmen. An animal rubs its itching flank against a tree. A man asks his kinsman to scratch him." He prayed especially for Okonkwo and his family. He then broke the kola nut and threw one of the lobes on the ground for the ancestors. As the broken kola nuts were passed round, Okonkwo's wives and children, and those who came to help them with the cooking, began to bring out the food. His sons brought out the pots of palm wine. There was so much food and drink that many kinsmen whistled in surprise. When all was laid out, Okonkwo rose to speak. "I beg you to accept this little kola," he said. "It is not to pay you back for all you did for me in these 7 years. A child cannot pay for its mother's milk. I have only called you together because it is good for kinsmen to meet." Yam pottage was served first, because it was like fufu, and because yam always came first. Served. Some kinsmen ate with egusi soup and a soup. The meat was then shared, so that every member of the Umuna had a portion. Every man rose in order of years and took a share. Even the few kinsmen who had not been able to come had their shares taken out for them in due term. As the palm wine was drunk, one of the oldest members of the Umuna rose to thank Okonkwo. "I say that we did not expect such a big feast. I will be suggesting that we did not know how open-handed our son Okonkwo is. We all know him, and we expected a big feast. But it turned out to be even bigger than we expected. Thank you. May all you took out return again tenfold. It is good in these days, when the younger generation consider themselves wiser than their sires, to see a man doing things in the grand old way. A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so to save them from starving. They all have food in their own homes. When we gather together, in the moonlit village ground, it is not because of the moon. Every man can see it in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. You may ask why I am saying all this. I say it because I fear for the younger generation, for you people. He waved his arm where most of the young men sat. As for me, I have only a short while to live, and so have Uchendo and Unochukwu and Emefo. But I fear for you young people, because you do not understand how strong is the bond of kinship. You do not know what it is to speak with one voice. And what is the result? An abominable religion has settled among you. A man can now leave his father and his brothers. He can curse the gods of his fathers and his ancestors like a hunter's dog that suddenly goes mad and turns on his master. I fear for you. I fear for the clan. He turned again to Okonkwo and said, "Thank you for calling us together." Part 3, Chapter 20. 7 years was a long time to be away from one's clan. A man's place was not always there, waiting for him. As soon as he left, someone else rose and filled it. The clan was like a lizard. If it lost its tail, it soon grew another. Okonkwo knew these things. He knew that he had lost his place among the 9 masked spirits who administered justice in the clan. He had lost the chance to lead his warlike clan against the new religion, which, he was told, had gained ground. He had lost the years in which he might have taken the highest titles in the clan. But some of these losses were not irreparable. He was determined that his return should be marked by his people. He would return with a flourish and regain the 7 wasted years. Even in his first year in exile, he had begun to plan for his return. The first thing he would do would be to rebuild his compound on a more magnificent scale. He would build a bigger barn than he had had before, and he would build huts for 2 new wives. Then he would show his wealth by initiating his sons into the Ozo society. Only the really great men in the clan were able to do this. Okonkwo saw clearly the high esteem in which he would be held, and he saw himself taking the highest title in the land. As the years of exile passed, one by one, it seemed to him that his chi might now be making amends for the past disaster. His yams grew abundantly, not only in his motherland, but also in Umuofia, where his friend gave them out year by year to sharecroppers. Then the tragedy of his first son had occurred. At first, it appeared as if it might prove too great for his spirit. But it was a resilient spirit, and in the end, Okonkwo overcame his sorrow. He had 5 other sons, and he would bring them up in the way of the clan. He sent for the 5 sons, and they came and sat in his obi. The youngest of them was 4 years old. "You have all seen the great abomination of your brother. Now he is no longer my son, or your brother. I will only have a son who is a man, who will hold his head up among my people. If any one of you prefers to be a woman, let him follow Nwoye now, while I am alive, so that I can curse him. If you turn against me when I am dead, I will visit you and break your neck." Okonkwo was very lucky in his daughters. He never stopped regretting that his Inma was a girl. Of all his children, she alone understood his every mood. A bond of sympathy had grown between them as the years had passed. Ezinma grew up in her father's exile and became one of the most beautiful girls in Mbanta. She was called Crystal of Beauty, as her mother had been called in her youth. The young, ailing girl who had caused her mother so much heartache had been transformed almost overnight into a healthy, buoyant maiden. She had, it was true, her moments of depression, when she would snap at everybody like an angry dog. These moods descended on her suddenly, and for no apparent reason, but they were very rare and short-lived. As long as they lasted, she could bear no other person but her father. Many young men and prosperous middle-aged men of Mbanta came to marry her, but she refused them all, because her father had called her one evening and said to her, "There are many good and prosperous people here, but I shall be happy if you marry in Umuofia when we return home." That was all he had said, but Ezinma had seen clearly all the thought and hidden meaning behind the few words, and she had agreed. "Your half-sister, Obiageli, will not understand me," Okonkwo said, "but you can explain to her." Although they were almost the same age, Ezinma wielded a strong influence over her half-sister. She explained to her why they should not marry yet, and she agreed also. And so the two of them refused every offer of marriage in Mbanta. "I wish she were a boy," Okonkwo thought within himself. She understood things so perfectly. Who else among his children could have read his thoughts so well? With two beautiful grown-up daughters, his return to Umuofia would attract considerable attention. His future sons-in-law would be men of authority in the clan. The poor and unknown would not dare to come forth. Umuofia had indeed changed during the 7 years Okonkwo had been in exile. The church had come and led many astray. Not only the lowborn and the outcast, but sometimes a worthy man had joined it. Such a man was Ogbuefi Ugana, who had taken 2 titles, and who, like a madman, had cut the anklet of his titles and carried away to join the Christians. The white missionary was very proud of him, and he was one of the first men in Umuofia to receive the sacrament of Holy Communion, or Holy Feast, as it was called in Igbo. Ogbuefi Ugana had thought of the feast in terms of eating and drinking, only more holy than the village variety. He had therefore put his drinking horn into his goatskin bag for the occasion. But apart from the church, the white men had also brought a government. They had built a court where the district commissioner judged cases in ignorance. He had court messengers who brought men to him for trial. Many of these messengers came from Umuru, on the bank of the great river where the white men first came many years before, and where they had built the center of their religion and trade and government. These court messengers were greatly hated in Umuofia because they were foreigners and also arrogant and high-handed. They were called Kotma, and because of their ash-colored shorts, they earned the additional name of ashy buttocks. They guarded the prison, which was full of men who had offended against the white man's law. Some of these prisoners had thrown away their twins, and some had molested the Christians. They were beaten in the prison by the Kotma and made to work every morning clearing the government compound and fetching wood for the white commissioner and the court messengers. Some of these prisoners were men of title, who should be above such mean occupation. They were grieved by the indignity and mourned for their neglected farms. As they cut grass in the morning, The younger men sang in time with the strokes of their machetes. Kotma of the ash buttocks, he is fit to be a slave. The white man has no sense, he is fit to be a slave. The court messengers did not like to be called ashy buttocks, and they beat the men, but the song spread in Umuofia. Okonkwo's head was bowed in sadness as Yobierica told him these things. Perhaps I have been away too long, Okonkwo said, almost to himself. But I cannot understand these things you tell me. What is it that has happened to our people? Why have they lost the power to fight? Have you not heard how the white man wiped out Abame? Asked Obierica. I have heard, said Okonkwo. But I have also heard that Abame people were weak and foolish. Why did they not fight back? Had they no guns and machetes? We would be cowards to compare ourselves with the men of Abame. Their fathers had never dared to stand before our ancestors. We must fight these men and drive them from the land. It is already too late, said Obierica sadly. Our own men and our sons have joined the ranks of the stranger. They have joined his religion, and they help to uphold his government. If we should try to drive out the white men in Umuofia, we should find it easy. There are only 2 of them. But what of our own people who are following their way and have been given power? They would go to Umuru and bring the soldiers, and we would be like Abame. He paused for a long time, and then said, I told you on my last visit to Mbanta how they hanged Aneto. What has happened to that piece of land in dispute? Asked Okonkwo. The white man's court has decided that it should belong to Nama's family, who had given much money to the white man's messengers and interpreter. Does the white man understand our custom about land? How can he, when he does not even speak our tongue? But he says that our customs are bad, and our own brothers who have taken up his religion also say that our customs are bad. How do you think we can fight when our own brothers have turned against us? The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. How did they get hold of Aneto to hang him? Asked Okonkwo. When he killed Oduche in the fight over the land, he fled to Aninta to escape the wrath of the earth. This was about 8 days after the fight, because Oduche had not died immediately from his wounds. It was on the 7th day that he died, but everybody knew that he was going to die, and Aneto got his belongings together in readiness to flee. But the Christians had told the white man about the accident, and he sent his Kotma to catch Aneto. He was imprisoned with all the leaders of his family. In the end, Oduche died, and Aneto was taken to Umuru and hanged. The other people were released, but even now, they have not found the mouth with which to tell their suffering. The 2 men sat in silence for a long while afterwards. Chapter 21. There were many men and women in Umuofia who did not feel as strongly as Okonkwo about the new dispensation. The white man had indeed brought a lunatic religion, but he had also built a trading store, and for the first time, palm oil and kernel became things of great price, and much money flowed into Umuofia. And even in the matter of religion, there was a growing feeling that there might be something in it after all, something vaguely akin to method in the overwhelming madness. This growing feeling was due to Mr. Brown, the white missionary, who was very firm in restraining his flock from provoking the wrath of the clan. One member, in particular, was very difficult to restrain. His name was Enoch, and his father was the priest of the snake cult. The story went around that Enoch had killed and eaten the sacred python, and that his father had cursed him. Mr. Brown preached against such excess of zeal. Everything was possible, he told his energetic flock, but everything was not expedient. And so Mr. Brown came to be respected even by the clan, because he trod softly on its faith. He made friends with some of the great men of the clan, and on one of his frequent visits to the neighboring villages, he had been presented with a carved elephant tusk, which was a sign of dignity and rank. One of the great men in that village was called Akuna, and he had given one of his sons to be taught the white man's knowledge in Mr. Brown's school. Whenever Mr. Brown went to that village, he spent long hours with Akuna in his obi, talking through an interpreter about religion. Neither of them succeeded in converting the other, but they learned more about their different beliefs. "You say that there is one supreme God who made heaven and earth," said Akuna on one of Miss Brown's visits. "We also believe in him and call him Chukwu. He made all the world and the other gods." "There are no other gods," said Mr. Brown. "Chukwu is the only God, and all others are false. You carve a piece of wood, like that one." He pointed at the rafters, from which Akuna's carved ikenga hung. "And you call it a god, but it is still a piece of wood." "Yes," said Akuna, "it is indeed a piece of wood. The tree from which it came was made by Chukwu, as indeed all minor gods were. But he made them for his messengers, so that we could approach him through them. It is like yourself. You are the head of your church." "No," protested Mr. Brown. "The head of my church is God himself." "I know," said Akuna, "but there must be a head in this world among men. Somebody like yourself must be the head here." "The head of my church in that sense is in England." "That is exactly what I am saying. The head of your church is in your country. He has sent you here as his messenger, and you have also appointed your own messengers and servants. Or let me take another example. The district commissioner. He is sent by your king." "They have a queen," said the interpreter on his own account. "Your queen sends her messenger, the district commissioner. He finds that he cannot do the work alone, and so he appoints Kotma to help him. It is the same with God, or Chukwu. He appoints the smaller gods to help him, because his work is too great for one person." "You should not think of him as a person," said Mr. Brown. "It is because you do so that you imagine he must need helpers. And the worst thing about it is that you give all the worship to the false gods you have created." "That is not so. We make sacrifices to the little gods, but when they fail and there is no one else to turn to, we go to Chukwu. It is right to do so. We approach a great man through his servants. But when his servants fail to help us, then we go to the last source of hope. We appear to pay greater attention to the little gods, but that is not so. We worry them more because we are afraid to worry their master. Our fathers knew that Chukwu was the overlord, and that is why many of them gave their children the name Chukwuka. Chukwu is supreme." "You said one interesting thing," said Mr. Brown. "You are afraid of Chukwu. In my religion, Chukwu is a loving father and need not be feared by those who do his will. But we must fear him when we are not doing his will, said Akuna. And who is to tell his will? It is too great to be known. In this way, Mr. Brown learned a good deal about the religion of the clan, and he came to the conclusion that a frontal attack on it would not succeed. And so he built a school and a little hospital in Umuofia. He went from family to family, begging people to send their children to his school. But at first they only sent their slaves or sometimes their lazy children. Mr. Brown begged and argued and prophesied. He said that the leaders of the land in the future would be men and women who had learned to read and write. If Umuofia failed to send her children to the school, strangers would come from other places to rule them. They could already see that happening in the native court, where the DC was surrounded by strangers who spoke his tongue. Most of these strangers came from the distant town of Umuru, on the bank of the great river where the white man first went. In the end, Mr. Brown's arguments began to have an effect. More people came to learn in his school, and he encouraged them with gifts of singlets and towels. They were not all young, these people who came to learn. Some of them were 30 years old or more. They worked on their farms in the morning and went to school in the afternoon. And it was not long before the people began to say that the white man's medicine was quick in working. Mr. Brown's school produced quick results. A few months in it were enough to make one a court messenger or even a court clerk. Those who stayed longer became teachers. And from Umuofia, laborers went forth into the Lord's vineyard. New churches were established in the surrounding villages, and a few schools with them. From the very beginning, religion and education went hand in hand. Mr. Brown's mission grew from strength to strength, and because of its link with the new administration, it earned a new social prestige. But Mr. Brown himself was breaking down in health. At first he ignored the warning signs, but in the end, he had to leave his flock, sad and broken. It was in the first rainy season after Okonkwo's return to Umuofia that Mr. Brown left for home. As soon as he had learned of Okonkwo's return 5 months earlier, the missionary had immediately paid him a visit. He had just sent Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, who was now called Isaac, to the new training college for teachers in Umuru. And he had hoped that Okonkwo would be happy to hear of it. But Okonkwo had driven him away with the threat that if he came into his compound again, he would be carried out of it. Okonkwo's return to his native land was not as memorable as he had wished. It was true his 2 beautiful daughters aroused great interest among suitors, and marriage negotiations were soon in progress. But beyond that, Umuofia did not appear to have taken any special notice of the warrior's return. The clan had undergone such profound change during his exile that it was barely recognizable. The new religion and government and the trading stores were very much in the people's eyes and minds. There were still many who saw these new institutions as evil, but even they talked and thought about little else, and certainly not about Okonkwo's return. And it was the wrong year, too. If Okonkwo had immediately initiated his 2 sons into the Ozo society, as he had planned, he would have caused a stir. But the initiation rite was performed once in 3 years in Umuofia, and he had to wait for nearly 2 years for the next round of ceremonies. Okonkwo was deeply grieved, and it was not just a personal grief. He mourned for the clan, which he saw breaking up and falling apart, and he mourned for the warlike men of Umuofia, who had so unaccountably become soft, like women. Chapter 22. Mr. Brown's successor was the Reverend James Smith, and he was a different kind of man. He condemned openly Mr. Brown's policy of compromise and accommodation. He saw things as black and white, and black was evil. He saw the world as a battlefield in which the children of light were locked in mortal conflict with the sons of darkness. He spoke in his sermons about sheep and goats, and about wheat and tares. He believed in slaying the prophets of Baal. Mr. Smith was greatly distressed by the ignorance which many of his flock showed, even in such things as the Trinity.
Of the stranger. They have joined his religion, and they help to uphold his government. If we should try to drive out the white men in Umuofia, we should find it easy. There are only 2 of them. But what of our own people who are following their way and have been given power? They would go to Umuru and bring the soldiers, and we would be like Abame. He paused for a long time and then said, I told you on my last visit to Mbanta how they hanged Aneto. What has happened to that piece of land in dispute? Asked Okonkwo. The white man's court has decided that it should belong to Nama's family, who had given much money to the white man's messengers and interpreter. Does the white man understand our custom about land? How can he, when he does not even speak our tongue? But he says that our customs are bad, and our own brothers who have taken up his religion also say that our customs are bad. How do you think we can fight when our own brothers have turned against us? The white man is very clever. He came peaceably and quietly with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart.